Let's talk about how to apply for a payment extension using IRS Form 1127. So here are the steps I want you to follow. First, you need to put the name or names shown on the return, and then you have to put your identifying number. So your identifying number can be your social, or it can be your individual tax identification number, your ITIN. Then you need to indicate actually the address, so street address, zip code, and city, and that's really important. And then what we talk about here in part 1, you need to actually indicate you need to actually clarify your request for extension. So here you would say something like, I request an extension from January 1st, 2030 to January 1st, 2033 to pay, let's say, $15,000. So here you are basically giving the IRS the time window that the agency has to abide with when actually considering your case, your situation. And you have to actually specify the amount of money, the amount of taxes that you actually you want to pay within the specified time period, okay? And so here, and then you have to also check basically whether the tax shown or required to be shown on form here, we have actually, it can be form 1040, it can be form 1120. You have to specify here what the form is. It can be form 1120 or form 1065. So here we chose, for this hypothetical scenario, we chose the second box, which is an amount determined as a deficiency on form 1040. So the whole situation of this hypothetical situation revolves around form 1040. And you can see you have to specify the request, the calendar year for which the request applies. So here we chose the request is for calendar year 2025 or fiscal year ending December 31st, 2025. Okay. And so part 1, you got to really specify the request for extension. Part 2, you need to really clarify the reason for extension. So undue hardship. So really, you can see on the screen here that I have actually put here an explanation as to what was the reason for extension. So we said here, I politely request that my reason for extension be approved as explained in the attached explanatory statement. Undue hardship will result if my application is denied. I will sustain a substantial financial loss if I am unable to pursue my normal occupation or conduct business under normal circumstances, and my total assets, if compelled to pay my current tax obligations, will substantially dwarf my total liabilities. Okay, so this is just, I'm giving you a feel, not dwarf. That's what we actually have a little typo here. It's actually dwarf my total liabilities. So the bottom line here is that basically you are telling the IRS why they should approve your request. Keep in mind though, there are actually alternatives to a payment extension. You have IRS payment plans. You have also the CNC status, so currently not collectible status. And you also have the OIC, the offer and compromise. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Now, in part 3, you got to have a supported documentation. So you have to attach certain documentation to your request. So the IRS wants you to have actually a statement of your assets and liabilities at the end of the last month, showing the book and market values of assets and whether securities are listed or unlisted. And you also need to have an itemized list of your income and expenses for each of the 3 months prior to the due date of the tax year. And so the IRS just wants to have a clear idea, okay? And then you have to actually have signature and verification. So you have to put your signature and the date. And if you're filing jointly, your spouse has to also sign and has to put the date also. And if actually you are actually submitting the documentation through a tax preparer, that tax preparer should also sign and date, okay? And so that's what it is. Now, how long is the tax payment extension? Well, it really depends. You must fill in your desired extension period as part of your application. For tax shown on the return, the extension period can be up to 6 months after the due date of your tax return, not including any filing extensions. For the tax assessed as a deficiency, your extension period can be up to 18 months from the payment due date. You may receive an additional 12-month extension in exceptional cases. If the tax deficiency were a result of your negligence or tax fraud, the IRS will not grant a payment extension. And what happens here is that simply because the IRS grants let's say an extension, doesn't mean that you have to stop paying interest, right? Interest will continue to accrue during your payment extension period. You will not be charged any late payment penalties during the extension period, but the IRS may assess certain charges if you don't make payment once your extension is over. Now, what are the penalties that you can avoid by getting a payment extension? Well, you can avoid the failure to pay penalty if you are granted a payment extension. This penalty accrues to 0.5% of your unpaid tax liability each month, up to a maximum of 25% of your unpaid taxes. You will still need to file your return on time to avoid another tax penalty, the failure to file penalty. So this penalty is more severe and accrues at a rate of 5% of your unpaid taxes each month, and up to a maximum of 25% of your unpaid tax liability. You can also file a Form 4868 to get a 6-month extension to file your tax return. Okay. Interest accrues on your unpaid balance even if you receive a tax payment extension. The IRS sets interest rates on a quarterly basis. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about how to apply for a payment extension using IRS Form 1127. Now, let me give you the overview about the whole situation here. When should you apply for a tax payment extension due to due to undue hardship? Timing is critical when submitting Form 1127. So if you don't send the form by the deadline, you will not be able to request a payment extension, and you will need to consider other tax relief strategies. So the deadline to submit Form 1127 is either of the following dates. So you have two scenarios. For tax shown on a return, the deadline is the due date of the tax return, not including extensions. And for a tax assessed as a deficiency, the deadline is the due date for paying the deficiency amount. So this is really important to really keep that in mind. So there are requirements for submitting Form 1127. So you must actually complete Form 1127 and attach the following as supporting documentation. You got to have a full statement of your assets and liabilities at the end of the previous month, and you got to have an itemized list of your income and expenses for each of the 3 months before the due date of the tax. Okay, and you need to actually provide this information to prove that paying your tax will cause undue hardship, and undue hardship goes beyond a mere inconvenience. You must show that you will experience a substantial financial loss if you pay your taxes by the due date. You also need to be specific about the type of hardship you will encounter. For example, if you can sell assets and at fair market value to pay your taxes, this may not qualify as an undue hardship. If you can borrow funds to pay your taxes, such as obtaining a home equity loan, the IRS may not view this as an undue hardship. However, if you need to sell assets for less than their market value to get the money and you can't get a loan, you may satisfy the undue hardship requirements. So it's always important to consult with a tax attorney to get help determining whether you meet the undue hardship condition. So when we talk about filing Form 1127, you will owe any of the following. If you can file Form 1127 if you will owe any of the following, and paying the tax will cause actually an undue hardship. So we're talking about income taxes, self-employment income taxes, withheld taxes on non-resident aliens and foreign corporations, taxes on private foundations and certain other tax-exempt organizations, taxes on qualified investment entities, taxes on green mail, popular in the 80s and not so much now. You also have taxes on structured settlement factoring transactions, and you have gift taxes, but not estate taxes. And Form 1127 can also be filed if you receive a notice and demand for a payment or a tax bill for any of the following. If paying them, this will cause undue hardship: normal taxes and surcharge taxes, taxes on private foundations and certain other tax-exempt organizations, taxes on qualified investments, and gift taxes. Let me give you the approach you need to really follow here in terms of filing Form 1127. First of all, you need to download the form. So you go to the IRS websites. So you have a clear idea that you have the latest. Actually, you got to have the latest. Okay. So what's the purpose of Form 1127? So the thing is that Form 1127 is basically a tax form used by individuals and businesses to request an extension of time to pay certain taxes owed to the Internal Revenue Service. Okay. And so the purpose of Form 1127 is to provide taxpayers with an opportunity to delay the payments of taxes if they are facing undue hardship. You can see that word comes back: undue hardship, undue hardship, undue hardship. So we're speaking about undue hardship or financial difficulties. And so by actually filing Form 1127, you are able to request an extension of time to pay the taxes due without incurring penalties or interest charges. This is kind of cool. And so the thing is that when we talk about benefits of Form 1127, this form has several benefits. You have extended payment deadline, right? You have penalty relief. You have additional time to gather funds. You are able to avoid collection actions, if you will. And you have the flexibility in payment arrangements. So this is kind of cool. So when we talk about flexibility in payment arrangements, Form 1127 provides an opportunity for taxpayers to actually propose alternative payment arrangements to the IRS. So as a taxpayer, you can suggest installment plans or other payment options that suit your financial situation, making it easier to fulfill your tax obligations. And so when we talk about Form 1127, certain people or certain organizations are able to qualify. So to be eligible to file Form 1127, you must meet the following criteria: undue hardship, of course, good faith effort, and timely filing. So good faith effort means that you must show that you have made a good faith effort to pay the tax liability. This includes exploring all reasonable options to obtain the funds necessary to pay the taxes, such as liquidating assets, borrowing money, or negotiating payment arrangements. Okay, so you have to really at least exhaust all avenues before the IRS can consider your request. You also need to think about timely filing. So you must submit Form 1127 before the tax liability is due. So the due date for filing this form is typically the same as the due date for paying the tax, which is usually April 15th for individuals or the 15th day of the third month after the end of the tax year for businesses. So keep in mind, though, that specific requirements and eligibility criteria may vary. So it's recommended that you actually talk to a specialist before you actually do the election or the request, if you will. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about how to apply for a payment extension using IRS Form 1127. Let me talk to you about the decision here. So when we talk about Form 1127, it's important to understand that after you download the Form 1127 from the IRS website, you actually start the application. You can actually also call the IRS at 1-800-829-3676, 1-800-829-3676. So you obtain the form, you provide your basic information as I showed you. You need to actually enter the type of tax and tax period covered. You need to explain the reason for the request. We went through all that. And you also need to calculate the estimated tax liability. This is something I didn't do. So when we talk about actually, you have to determine your estimated tax liability by completing the relevant sections of the form. So this includes reporting your total tax liability, any payments made to date, and the balance due. And you need to specify the requested extension period. And so this can be in terms of months and days, though, okay? Or you can also actually specify a date whereby you want to actually be able to honor your financial obligations. And you need to attach supporting documentation if applicable. You always need to do this. I mean, we advise all our business clients and individual clients to always attach all kinds of paperwork to actually contextualize the request. So the IRS has more, how do I say it, has more willingness to actually to approve the application, okay? And don't forget to actually also sign and date the form. You want to have that, and you want to submit the form. And so before submitting the form, please make a copy of the completed Form 1127 and all accompanying documents for your records, and mail the original form and attachment to the appropriate IRS address as specified in the instructions. And it's always recommended to sending all the documentation via certified mail or a reputable courier service to have proof of delivery, because you want to have that proof of delivery, because otherwise, because the last thing you want is to actually say, you send this to the IRS and then basically the IRS has not received it. And also you want to follow up and payment. You want to follow up on payment arrangements. The IRS will review your request and may contact you for additional information if necessary. In the meantime, it's really essential to continue making efforts to pay your tax liability as much as possible. And if the extension is granted, the IRS will provide instructions on how to make payment arrangements for the deferred amounts. So this is kind of cool. One thing I need to say though before closing on this section is that remember that Form 1127 is a request for an extension of time to pay taxes, not an extension of time to file tax returns. So if you also need an extension to file your return, you will need to submit the appropriate form for that purpose. For example, Form 4868 for individual income tax returns. Let's talk about the types, schedules, and deductions on Form 1127. It's really important to have that because this helps you to sort of contextualize and clarify your request for an extension. So first of all, the types. Form 1127 can be used for various types of federal taxes, including income tax, estate tax, gift tax, and certain excise taxes. It applies to both individual taxpayers and businesses. In terms of schedules, Form 1127 itself does not have any specific schedules. However, when submitting the form, you may need to provide supporting documentations to demonstrate the undue hardship you are facing. This documentation might include financial statements, bank statements, income and expense records, and any other relevant information that shows your inability to pay the tax liability. You also need to think about deductions. So Form 1127 is not directly related to deductions. Instead, it focuses on requesting an extension of time for payment, and deductions are typically claimed on the appropriate tax return form, such as Form 1040 for individual income tax or Form 1120 for corporate income tax. And so when filing your tax return, you can really claim deductions that you qualify for based on the tax laws and regulations in effect for the tax year in question. And deductions actually will reduce your taxable income, which can result in lower tax liability when you think about it. And when we talk about the filing deadlines and extensions on this Form 1127, well, there are some key deadlines or some key timelines rather to understand. So the form should generally be filed on or before the original due date of the tax return, typically April 15th for individuals. However, the IRS allows additional time to submit Form 1127 if you demonstrate reasonable cause. So reasonable cause means what? To qualify for an extension of time for a payment under Form 1127, you must show that payment of the tax will actually result in, again, said this before, undue hardship. Let me close to this conversation by giving to you a few common mistakes to avoid while filing Form 1127. So missing the deadline. So ensure that you submit Form 1127 on or before the original due date of the tax payments. Failing to file on time may result in penalties and interest. You also need to think about incomplete or inaccurate information. Provide all the necessary information accurately on the form. Double check your entries, such as your name, social security number, address, and the tax period for which the payment is due. Also, when you have insufficient explanation of undue hardship, so when explaining your undue hardship circumstances, be clear and specific about why you are unable to make the tax payment on time. Provide supporting documentation if available, such as medical records, financial statements, or any other relevant evidence, and incorrect calculation of the amount owed. So make sure that you calculate the correct amount of tax due and clearly indicate it on the form. If you underestimate the amount or fail to include it, your request for an extension may be denied. And also filing the wrong form. So Form 1127 is specifically for an extension of time for a payment of tax due to undue hardship. if you are seeking an extension for filing your tax return, you need to file a different form, right? And so this is actually 4868, as I said before, for individual income tax returns, or Form 7004 for business tax returns. Ignoring correspondence from the IRS is a bad thing. Don't do it. If the IRS requests additional information or documentation to support your request for an extension, make sure to respond quickly. Ignoring their request may lead to a denial of your application and not paying any tax at all. So even if you are facing an undue hardship, it's advisable to pay as much of the tax owed as you can with your application. This demonstrates your willingness to fulfill your tax obligations and can improve your chances of getting an extension. So this is really cool. And so you want to follow those things to make sure that you actually get approved. Remember, Form 1127 really can provide a lifeline for taxpayers facing financial hardships that prevent them from meeting their tax payments obligations on time. So by understanding the purpose of the form, you are able to navigate tax season with greater confidence and ease this year. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Let's do a quick recap here. So in today's conversation, I was explaining to you how to apply for a payment extension using IRS Form 1127. So I give you the steps, the overview, the approach, the decision, and finally the recap. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.